Welcome to the... What's the name of the...
That's classic.
That is classic. Welcome to the That's Classic podcast with myself, Greg Copeland, and Felix Petterson.
Yeah.
We are going to talk to you about today a Porsche 924, but the plan with this series is to explore many different cars, many different classic cars, and we are going to focus specifically on one car per episode. So rather than jumping around talking about topical classic car news or lots of different cars, we're just going to focus on one model and dive pretty, not super deep, but because that would take hours. We'd be here a long time. But, deep enough to give you a good overview of the car. If you're considering buying one, or maybe you've just bought one and wants to find out a bit more about it, we thought it'd be a fun thing to do. But mainly it's just an excuse to sit down and nerd out about a particular car. So what a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
So the things we're going to take you through, I mean, we should probably introduce ourselves as well. So, as I said, I am Greg. I work in car sales. I work here at Kaiser Classic in Stockholm. I've owned a number of, I guess you would call not creative, I'm not into supercars, but performance cars, sports cars, and classic cars over the years. So, but now I work in classic cars, so that's my life and what I'm really passionate about. That's why we're talking about classics.
Yeah. Like Greg said, I'm Felix. I've only ever, actually had two classic cars. One is a 911, which I still have, and the other one's a 924, which I sold to Greg.
Do you like Porsches, bro?
No, not really.
Not really. We were saying earlier we've got to be careful this doesn't become like a Porsche loving. Porsche loving. Because we do like our Porsche.
And we'll most certainly digress into 911 ownership as well, because it's quite easy to draw parallels or point out the differences between owning a 924 and owning a 911. So bear with us.
What we're going to take you through today. So we'll just look at the history of the 924. Look at the values, like how they've increased, where they are now, what kind of money you need to spend to get into a good one, or even a project car. So we'll touch on that. And then a little bit about buying, what kind of things to look for if you were to buy one. And then lastly, would we buy one ourselves? That's something we're always going to do on the show. Interesting on this one because we have both bought them ourselves.
Yeah.
We have both owned a 924. But also, what would our dream 924 be? So we will do that for every car. So at some point we're going to do a Miata, probably a Land Rover Defender, and we'll do the same thing. Like, would we buy one ourselves? I think it's an important question to ask. Would we spend our own money? And what spec would it be? What model?
So
cool.
Should we just do a quick background to how we came about owning 924s?
Yeah, I think
you actually have more experience in 924 ownership.
Yeah,
so
I think you're nerdier than I am. You know more about them, but I've owned more 924s than you. So I had I'm as probably most car guys are, can be quite impulsive with buying cars, and I really had a sudden urge to get a 944 or a 944, depending how you call it, but did the usual eBay thing, stuck a few bids in on a really cool looking, it looked very cool, it was very cheap, so it was probably a complete rust bucket, but cool looking black early 944, and I got outbid at the last minute. It was just so bitter, and then did that classic thing of in my head I'd already bought it and I was already driving home in it and missed out on it, and I was like, I need to find the next best thing. So I was looking around for just local cars. I was like, I've got the money here to buy something. It's the worst way of buying cars, don't take this as advice, but just found the next nearest car, literally geographically nearest car, and it wasn't a 944, it was a 924. Didn't know much about the 924 at the time. This was how many years ago? 7 or 8 years ago. I always knew the 944. I didn't know as much about the 924. Went and saw this car. The guy was like, "Oh, it's an S. It's a 924S." I was like, "Cool. I don't know what that means, but I'll take it." Did a short. I don't think he even test drove it. He was a mechanic, owned a garage, and so I bought a 924S unknowingly. Found out about obviously the 944 engine, suspension, brakes. Found out it was an improved model, significantly improved. But there are shortcomings to those improvements, as we'll talk about. I think there's some really nice things in the original 94 and how basic it is, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But yeah, so I had and then I bought a second one actually, a track, one that was completely stripped out. There was going to be a track car, and then suddenly I realised I think I had an Impreza WRX and then two 924s parked on a street parking. My neighbours hated me, and my wife hated me as well. So those had to go. You can't have too many classic cars apparently. So, and then I guess the next part of the journey is yours. I'm trying to link onto the back of it again.
So I bought mine. I've always been intrigued by the 924. Sort of quite opposite, quite different from you, because you didn't really know what you were buying. I knew full well what I was buying, and actually I've always been intrigued by the 924 because it's always been sort of an underdog. But the Porsche that I really want, obviously, was a 911. So as soon as I bought my 911, which was about 12 years ago now, still got it, I sort of started looking for 924s as well, because I thought it would be nice to have sort of a two-car garage with two Porsches. But I've always been more into the early cars, the sort of 1976 through 78, and we'll get into what makes those so special. So I had looked around over the years, on and off, and found some cars, but they were either too far away or too far gone rust-wise, or they were too expensive, or all three. And then at the beginning of 2020, one actually popped up just 15 minutes away from where I live. So I went to see it and struck a deal with the guy. It wasn't running very well. It had been off the road for 12 years, so I did it up, got it through its MOT, and then enjoyed it for a bit, and then felt like I didn't really have the energy to sort of keep fixing it, because there were still things left on it to do. But I felt that I'd done my part, and that's when you came into the picture.
Yeah, so I'd had a couple of 94s in the past, and at the time, so I just bought my first classic since moving to Sweden. I bought a Plymouth Valiant, like a 66 car. Really cool thing to cruise around in, but I was missing. I always find when you get something like cruising slow, you get really into that, but then you start getting into roundabouts, trying to like lay brake or like throw it around, and you're like, this is just not the car to do it in. So I always kind of flip between the two, and I was just really hankering after like a performance car again, or like a sporty car. And 94 was always on the list because they're just affordable. We'll get into like the pros of the cars, but they're just great little cars. They're affordable, light, well balanced, but yeah, why we picked the 94. Obviously, we both own them, so it's easier to talk about a car that you've owned yourself and you have a little knowledge about. So it was an obvious starting point for us. But we both had a real love for this car because of there's a lot of snobbery in the Porsche world around the 94, and it really frustrates me. I think it's so undeserved. I think there's such humble, good little cars. There's such a great little car under there. When you peel back the, if you ignore the badge, I think it's a car that if it had a Volkswagen badge on it, and it's a whole other debate, but had it had a Volkswagen badge on it, it may, or if you just ignore the badge, and that's what that was kind of my view on it. If you just ignore the badge completely, the car is, it's a superb. These cars make great GT cars. So we were talking about this earlier, but when I had my original 94s, I just blasted around on back roads and didn't really use it much on the motorway. But if you sit on a motorway for a long journey for a couple of hours, these cars will absolutely munch the miles away.
And you didn't realise this until after you drove it?
No, it's the first motorway journey I'd done, and that was the funny thing. I'd never done a proper motorway journey in one, and just got to like 110 kilometres, like about 70 miles an hour, and it just it just felt so comfortable there.
Yeah.
It just felt like it was built to be there, and I never appreciated how good they were at that. They're also brilliantly packaged as a car. They're so compact, but you've still got 4 seats. You've got a big boot, roomy cabin, and like we're both tall, and we have no issues fitting inside. So the packaging is just so clever on those cars.
Yeah.
Mechanically robust. The original 2-litre engine especially gets a lot of shit for being Audi derived. Later it appeared in a van. It didn't begin in a van as most people think, but people mostly always write it off, which is incorrect, but write it off as a van engine. But the bottom end of that engine is really strong.
I think Top Gear is to blame for that.
Top Gear is to blame for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's probably one of them. So yeah, you've got a really solid engine in there. And these cars have been used for some crazy expeditions. Like, that's the always thing, like getting into any car, but particularly a classic car, you're not going to enjoy it if it's breaking down all the time at the end of the day. So you don't want to be repairing all the time. You want to take it on trips. And people have done some amazing trips in these things, like Trans-Siberian rallies and like intercontinental road trips. Like they really will see you through long drives.
And also, if they break, they're really easy to work on. And they're a really sort of appealing way to get into classic cars if you're willing to learn, or if you haven't really had that much mechanical experience before. It's a really simple, easy car to work on.
Yeah, and parts are readily available. That's another thing we were talking about. You can get parts super easily. They're cheap. And again, that's a big consideration when we were talking about 911s earlier. Like, if you just like a worst case scenario, usually on a car, like rust is a big thing, but an engine rebuild is probably the second biggest thing after any kind of big rust and structural rust repairs. Those are your big 2 costs. So if you need to do an engine rebuild, a 924, I mean, you could just pick up an engine for like, I don't know, it must be like 1,000, 2,000 euros to get into.
And if you want someone to rebuild a 924 engine, any engine builders can do it.
Yeah.
It's a cast iron block. It's really
911 has to go to a specialist Porsche technician, and you're looking at Felix knows the hard way how much this costs, but you're looking at 10 to 15,000 euros to rebuild one of those cars. For that kind of money, you could buy a really nice 924. Like the cost of ownership of a 924 for the amount of smiles, I hate that phrase, but like smiles per mile, but like for the amount of enjoyment you would get, especially driving in such a balanced, lightweight, balanced chassis.
I'm thinking, we've been going for 15 minutes.
Maybe we'll take a short break. What was my last thing? I think that is, it's a good point to end on. I was just going to say it's a criminally underappreciated car due to the badge on its nose, and I think had it had a different badge, I think it could have been a different story. But I look at that car as a car. If you take the badge away, it's just a brilliant car. It's well balanced, it's practical, mechanically robust. Lightweight, near to 1,000 kilos, which is the magic number for me in terms of performance cars. Brilliant to drive, great fun. So that's a bit on the why we chose the car and how we arrived at the 924. And then in the next section, we will take you through the history. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back after the short break. So now Felix is going to take us through the history of the 924, and what an interesting history it is.
Yeah.
It's not like a typical car development history.
No, it's not. I'll try to keep it short. If you're interested, there's plenty of interesting things to read online. But basically, Volkswagen needed something to replace the common gear with. Porsche wanted something to replace the 914 with, which had, up until that point, had been their sort of entry-level sports car. Entry-level car, basically. And Porsche didn't have a lot of money. Volkswagen had a lot of money, but not a lot of engineers. So Volkswagen and Porsche had previously had, obviously they have history together. So Volkswagen commissioned Porsche to develop a entry-level sports coupe for them that had to utilize as many Volkswagen or Audi parts as possible. So Porsche did that, and somewhere in between the point where the hands were shaking and the car was supposed to be ready, Volkswagen decided to back out because they wanted to focus on the what would eventually be the Scirocco.
Was this something to do with the oil crisis as well?
Yeah. Obviously, oil crisis happened in 73, 74 something.
Yeah.
So they wanted to sort of downsize a bit. So Porsche...
We gave birth to the Scirocco though, which is another awesome car. Yeah, maybe that will feature something.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a Scirocco podcast at some point. But so basically Porsche bought the entire project off Volkswagen.
What was the price they paid? I wrote that down somewhere.
Yeah, I think I read it.
Is it like 150 million? That sounds too cheap.
Yeah, well, I think it was really cheap. They bought it really cheap.
I feel like it was 150 million for the project, which nowadays sounds like such a small amount of money.
Yeah, but I don't know what currency. D-marks?
But yeah, it could be
could be something.
$125 million.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah. It's I suppose that's cheap in the car industry.
I know nothing about developing a car.
No,
that sounds pretty cheap.
Yeah, that's something for an entirely different podcast.
Yeah.
But so Porsche bought it and continued developing it, but still utilizing Volkswagen Audi parts, and they had some sort of arrangement with Volkswagen to buy parts. And part of the original deal as well was that the project that eventually became the 924 was to be built in Audi's factory in Neckarsulm in Germany, the old NSU factory. And it was also built by Volkswagen technicians under supervision of Porsche engineers. And that's also why the early 924s actually use VW color use. The basic colors that were available to the early 924s are actually Volkswagen colors.
Interesting, I did not know that.
So yeah, that's the really short history of, like I said, if you want to know more, there's plenty of information to find elsewhere. And I might be wrong at something. I may have got.
Fact check this man.
Yeah. I don't work like that. I don't fact check.
Should we talk a bit about the models as well? That's kind of interesting. So there's three. Am I wrong already? There's three key models, isn't there?
Yeah, 924 Turbo S.
And the Carrera GT.
Yeah, that's
almost a different, because I remember when I was researching this, it's like, should that count as a model? But to me, that's almost an entirely different car.
Yeah,
that's a special car.
Yeah, homologation, special, real expensive. But yeah, so the should I do the early ones and you do the S's?
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, given the way.
So the 924 was launched in 76, and we're looking at prices. I've got some interesting reading down here, but it was the equivalent of 5,000 euros.
I think we said like about 5,000 euros, isn't it, to get into?
And at least here in Sweden, and that's about 50%. No, it's the 911 was 50% more expensive than that.
Yeah.
So it's positioned as really sort of an entry-level Porsche. Still an expensive car, but fairly affordable for if you really wanted one. So it was so the early cars, and by early I mean 1976 through 78, used the 2-liter EA, or is it AE 831 engine?
Good question.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, cast iron block, Porsche.
EA 831.
EA 831. Okay. Porsche developed the cylinder head, so the power output was 125 metric horsepower.
Yeah. Which a lot of people, you hear a lot of. There's two complaints, and we'll talk about both: underpowered and the brake support.
Yeah.
You've got a 1,000 kilo car with 125 horsepower.
Yeah, and especially because I've been doing some maths. If you compare it to, say, a 1978 911 SC, that has a specific power output of 60 horsepower per liter, and the 924 actually had 62.5. So it was for the engine size, it was quite impressive at the time actually. So mated to a 4-speed manual gearbox that was obviously mounted in the rear, and and it was generally well received.
Yeah,
like you said. I'm not really sure how much of the complaints of it being underpowered was made by American journalists, because the early US spec cars were really underpowered. They were like
90 horsepower.
Yes, something
it's
around.
Like 40 horsepower, 35 horsepower.
Yeah. And I think in 1979 or something, it was actually bumped up to 110.
It was an emissions thing.
They got a catalytic converter fitted, and so they could get rid of.
So that's the thing. When you read online, you've got to be careful, because you read a lot of these reviews and opinions on these cars online, and just be careful that you're not reading US views where they were 35 horsepower down, which in a car that has only UK 125 horsepower, that's like, what's that, like a quarter or a third? I don't know, my maths is terrible. It's a chunk of power, for sure. I mean, that's one of the chief complaints when you see people talk about these cars, is that it's underpowered, but it's a similar weight and power to a Miata, again, which is a car that people, not necessarily people who don't know what they're talking about, but people always knock those for being underpowered. But if anyone who's driven one knows, they're just the most superb chassis and such a riot to drive, like a proper momentum car. And for me, the 94 is clearly the same, with the added practicality of a fixed roof and rear seats, big boots, and a Porsche badge, which is interesting.
And I don't know if I should get too nerdy, but the reason, I can explain why I've always loved the early 924s, the 76 through 78 models, because it's got a purity to the lines. It's got dainty little wing mirrors that were sourced off I think it was the Mark I Polo or something, and a bit some chrome strips, and the wheels as well are recessed really deeply into the wheel wells, so it looks really dainty.
So I think the early cars, we were talking about values a bit earlier, but the early cars, that silhouette without the spoiler, it's a personal thing, but I'm with you on the spoilerless earlier models, and I think with the chrome trim and the right colour with the chrome trim, if you look at some side shots, and these cars are getting more of a cult following. If you go onto Instagram and look at hashtag Porsche 94, you'll see some really nicely photographed cars on some nice backgrounds. And if you look at a side profile of a 924 in the right colour without the spoiler, it's a really lovely looking car.
See, we'll probably try and get some.
You might find some.
An overlay, but if we don't, because
technology.
Hashtag technology. See if I could find something. These are. Look at this.
Yeah, but that for me is not a bad looking car. I like the chrome on the tail trim. The boot tailgate, but which quite a few of them have chrome window surrounds. I never was a chrome guy, but I don't know if it's an age thing.
It probably is.
Probably just getting old.
And it's not really that much chrome at all.
Yeah,
it's just really tiny strips around.
It just accents the windows and the boot line on the tailgate. And when you look at a side profile shot of a base 924 in the right colour, I just think there's such a lovely shape, and I think that's going to become more and more appreciated.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
for their simplicity and
and look at, it's an unfair comparison perhaps, but if you look at the sort of mid-year 911s, the early rubber bumper cars, but with the narrow bodies, they've always been frowned upon. But now they're really getting into their own, and then people really start to appreciate them. And I think that will be exactly the same with the 924s.
Yeah, I think not only appreciated for like their value and superb balance and their robustness, but I think I certainly have started to really appreciate what a lovely shape it is, especially from a side profile. But you've got pop-up headlights as well, which are really cool. From the back, such a clean back end to it, and the lights, just that square light.
And also a thing that we haven't mentioned, but something that's worth remembering, is that the 924 was actually the first of very many things for Porsches. For Porsche, it was the first front-engine car. It was the first start of the transaxle era.
Yeah.
First water-cooled car.
Yeah.
It was really a step on in terms of sort of Porsche building a, inverted commas, modern or conventional car.
Yeah.
So it's it really deserves its place in sort of in Porsche history, and I think that's what people are starting to appreciate.
I think it's pretty clear, like with both. I really love the original 2 litre, but we should talk about the 2.5 as well, which is what I owned. So that was my first 924. But yeah, the key difference with the S model, which is those have really shot up in value. Actually, they are now 15 to 20,000 euros to get into a decent one. I paid like 2,700. Well, probably like 2,500 euros when I bought mine. So. Probably should have held on to that. Yeah, but they've really shot up now. And the key difference is the engine. It's a 2.5 litre Porsche developed engine, inline 4. But so you've got 150 horsepower in the earlier car, the 87, and like 160 in the 88. So you've got a chunk more horsepower. The purists prefer it because it's a Porsche developed engine, both top and bottom end, not just the head.
Yeah, it was a 944 engine, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a 944 engine.
Detuned. Not
interestingly,
Yeah.
And actually quicker. I think
I think it was
quicker in a straight line, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was detuned not deliberately, not to make it quicker than a 944, but then when the 944, well, the basic 944 was discontinued and replaced by the 944S, they could give the 924S the full fat 163 metric horsepower engine.
So yeah, that's one of the key differences. But the downside with that is it's a more complex engine. Parts are slightly more expensive, I believe. Yeah,
and I think that they changed other things as well, switch gear and everything. So they sort of are hampered by the Porsche tax. Yeah,
which you are certainly not in the 2 litre car. Yeah. The other thing is brakes. So you've got 94 brakes. You've got 5-stud all around, which opens up some different wheel options and braking options. 944 brakes, 944 suspension. So it just opens up a lot more options for arguably better for track days because you've got discs all around. Although the drums in the back of the base car, the 94, they use them in the race series, so they can't be that bad. Like you don't see those guys having too many issues stopping. So with the right pads and fluid and the original rear drum brake setup, don't be put off by that for sure. No.
Should we do? I'm not sure.
Should we take a short break?
Yeah, I think so.
Right, so welcome back after that short break. So now we're going to talk about the 924 Turbo, or the 931, if you want to be.
Yeah, if you're really.
What is the 93? Why do they have those? I guess it's a Porsche thing, but they have those.
Yeah, it's a. I don't know. Maybe it was the 3 in the middle was sort of designates the turbo. I don't know. 911, 913, 924, 931.
Yeah, interesting.
But then again, the 944 is the 951.
Yeah. Yes, it ends in 1 though, doesn't it? I was trying to think of the other one that had that funny. But normal people don't talk like that. So just call it a 94. I haven't owned a 94, or nearly owned a 94 turbo actually. I nearly bought one quite recently. There was
Really?
a track, potentially going to be a bit of a track car, but it had a gearbox issue, and it's the first year of the 94 turbo which had the 915. This is super nerdy, but the Porsche didn't come with a 915.
No, well, it had 915 internals,
something,
I think.
Yeah, something that just sounded scary.
G31?
Maybe. It's something that sounded scary and expensive.
And that was, I don't really know that much about 9.
There was a different gearbox, wasn't there, in the first year? There was one that came with actually had a Porsche gearbox.
Yeah, and those can be quite expensive to rebuild.
Yes,
rebuild.
Yeah. It was available from 79, and was introduced to bridge the gap between the 94 and the 911 SC. So the 94 visually, the turbo looks to the man on the street would look
very similar,
or the woman. The man or woman on the street would look the same as a 94. The giveaway, there are two key visual giveaways. So there's the little slotted vents on the nose.
Yeah.
In the panel that sits just below the hood, or we call it a bonnet in England. I don't know what you call it.
The
hood, but yeah.
Yeah, that slam panel.
Slam panel. Yeah. So it's got some little slotted vents in there. That's one of the key visual differences. The second is the I always call them knacker ducts. But like the knacker duct on the bonnet, which is quite a cool feature.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. Obviously, sucking a little extra air in.
And I think that all the rest of the world spec 924 turbos came with 5-stud wheels as standard.
Yeah.
I do know that in the US you could have them with the original 4-spoke and I suppose drums in the rear.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it doesn't seem like a good combination. But the 5-stud thing, if you're super nerdy, you will always see the 94S and the 924 turbo have 5-stud wheels.
Yeah.
And that there are advantages to that. There's it opens up braking possibilities because you can take 944 brakes, and there's a lot probably. I'm assuming there's probably more aftermarket options for 944s in the 5-stud than the 4-stud Volkswagen pattern. And then also you've got more...
it's not even a Volkswagen pattern, I think.
Yeah, I think it's like a unique...
4x108.
108, isn't it? Yeah.
So it's the same as some Japanese cars, but I think that was because the front brakes were sourced from the, again, really nerdy, and I may be wrong, so nerdy and wrong. Potentially. I think they were sourced off the NSU or the Volkswagen K70. So I think that's the reason why they use that bolt pattern.
Interesting. Okay. But it makes, if you're into it's a consideration for sure if you're buying a 94 and you want to create like a kind of scene or show car, you are quite limited with wheels. Although companies like Japan Racing actually do a ton of wheels in that bolt pattern, so you can get good. Nowadays, there is a good aftermarket wheel, and they do some really cool designs. If you don't mind having heavy, made, they're not the best wheels, but like something like a Japan Racing, like a cheap style wheel, I would call it.
Yeah, but if you are... And this is where our differences show, because you are a few years younger than me, and I'm the older and more sensible person. But if you were looking at sort of getting some period correct aftermarket wheels, that might be tricky because most of the things that you'll find are for the 4x100 Volkswagen pattern, and they won't fit.
And you've got so many options with that pattern that you can't adapt. So that's a bit of a consideration depending on what you want to do with the car for sure. The big thing with the turbo is obviously the power. So now up to 170 horsepower. So it's the most powerful of the models. So you've got an extra 10 horsepower.
But the US spec cars were...
I didn't know that.
They were considerably down on power.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, I don't know where they landed. I didn't think about that with the US turbos. And eventually, the final power output on the later models is 177, which in a car that weighs not much over, I think that, no, they're heavier actually, the turbos.
Yeah,
They're like 1100 and
50-ish?
1150-ish. Yeah, it's the 177 horsepower. It's going to be fun. I keep coming, like, for me, the 1,000 kilos is the magic number. Whatever car you're looking at, it's almost a criteria when I'm buying a car is to try and get something around the 1,000 kilo mark, because then it almost doesn't matter what power it has.
Was that why you destroyed my old one?
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, good point for this. Yeah, so the 94 is about 180 kilos. We quickly got it down to, we stuck it on a set of corner scales, and yeah, we were just going to fit a bucket seat just because I got a free Recaro and put that in the car, and I was like, oh, that looks really good. And then my friend turned up, and we were like, oh, let's try doing some weight out. And then minutes later, we had an angle grinder and a drill, and we were just cutting holes and everything. And
Greg, and you sent me pictures, and I was, at the moment, I was still a bit, I shouldn't say that I was regretting selling it, but I sort of missed the car.
Yeah.
As it was when I had it, and I got the pictures from you, and that sort of cured me.
Yeah, well,
it made me not wanting to buy the car back.
So something good came of it, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So my destruction of your beautiful 77.
Oh yeah.
Something good came of
my
it.
sold new in Sweden, 8 owner.
Don't tell me. But yeah, that was you can. There's something nice about originality, especially a car like that, and it was probably sacrilegious.
Yeah, it was.
It was, but the cool thing is we got it down to nearly 1,000 kilos very quickly. There's a lot of weight in the exhaust system. Obviously, things like spare wheel, like the easy way to lose, but even the rear bench, I can't remember what we weighed that at, but it was super heavy. The standard exhaust system, even the mid to rear section and the exhaust and the back box was like 18 kilos. So.
And the seats as well, really heavy.
Oh yeah, the standard seats. There's a ton of, no pun intended, a ton of weight in there that you can take out, which is amazing. So these cars make brilliant race cars, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise that they're not good track or race cars. Look at the 94 Racing Series in the UK. They are very potent little cars on track. Not fast in a straight line, but they're proper momentum cars. So yeah, those are the big things with the turbo. You've got a massive dollop of extra power, but they came with their downsides. So they had reliability issues, additional complexity. There was overheating issues, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Early cars, so the early ones aren't the ones to go for, from what I've read. But now, I mean, the values of those cars has really shot up. They're probably the most valuable, even more than similar to an S actually, I would say.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe a little bit higher than a good S, but yeah, I mean, we'll get into as we said earlier, like what our dream spec car would be. But yeah, for me, the turbo is, I kind of I love the silhouette, as I said before, of the 94, but particularly with the additional like collectability of the turbo. But there's a few interior and color options that I think make it really cool. So yeah, that would.
But it's actually quite interesting that Porsche decided not to add sort of flared wheel arches to the turbo.
Cool thing, isn't it?
So I mean, the 911 is a brilliant example. They fitted these massive rear arches and front arches as well to fit some bigger rubber in. And I don't know if it was deliberate or that they simply decided that there was plenty of room in the wheel arches as well already to fit some wider arches.
That's a good point, and that's getting to even early. But obviously that theme has continued with the turbos. They've always had the wider. It's how the turbo body, and obviously the GT3 RS had the turbo body. It's that wider body and additional rubber, which makes sense with the power, but the 94, they did not do that with the turbo. And I don't know the wheel widths and the tyre widths on the turbo. Maybe someone can inform us about that. But yeah, I don't know if they ran extra rubber to counter that. The next thing I was going to talk about was interesting colours.
Yeah.
I'm big on like working in the classic car trade. I unusual colours to me from an investment point of view and collectability point of view. It's obvious, but rare and interesting colours are for sure stand out. Like I have no. You sent me recently. It was a lovely car, but a silver turbo. I don't know. I never used to be too bothered about silver cars, but my wife is now. She's like, they're the most boring looking cars, and she seemed to have ingrained it into me. But there's some really cool colours, as you said earlier, because of the Volkswagen, the borrowed Volkswagen VW colour palette. You've got like signal green, rally yellow is quite a cool colour. We should stick some of these pictures up somewhere. But I mean, maroon. Is it Reseda?
Reseda green, yeah. I think this is Reseda green.
Yeah, I mean, what a cool colour.
Yeah.
Like, don't buy a fucking silver or a black one. Get something interesting because it will be a better investment. It's a more interesting, more rare colour.
But then again, buy...
Yeah, don't buy just on the colour.
No.
Don't be like,
buy a decent car and have it resprayed if you must.
But then it's not the original colour, which does count for something. So people
True.
Yeah.
But it's a 94. They're worth nothing.
Well,
yet.
Yes, exactly.
But we could speak about the colour of our car or my car that later became your car, because that was a silver one.
Diamond silver,
yeah. To begin with, and then later on in its life, I think around 1990 somewhere, they decided to paint the lower portion some dark blue. And that was a factory option, I think, from 1979 onwards, to have it
on non-turbo cars.
Yeah, not sure.
I
know that it was
the big thing with the turbo cars. Me, I loved it, and we'll get into like our dream spec 94. But like for me, I love the two-tone stuff. I just think it looks so 80s. And it's just such a cool thing. So. Yeah, I didn't realise that was actually a factory option, because I know on our car it was done post-factory.
And it was done quite poorly as well.
Yeah, if you're being purist. But that's like, that's a bit too purist to get into.
But yeah, I like the Larry 70s colours.
I mean, like Mexico beige is an interesting one, petrol blue.
Yeah, and that's more Porsche original colours, I think, because petrol blue was a 911 colour. I'm not sure
Bahama
if it was.
blue.
Yeah.
Pastel beige. We've got a pastel beige 911 over there. There's just some really interesting choices. Like as I say, if you can get black and silver and Gauze red, but for me personally, and it's something I always look out for in the car trade, is cars that are unusual colours. They just stand out. They're more interesting. I think for me personally, I just feel happier walking up to a car that's a yellow or a purple or a pink or just an interesting shade. We had a raspberry red metallic, which is basically metallic pink 911 here, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. It's just, I think something like that just pops when you're photographing it, when you're looking at it, it just really pops and stands out.
And that maybe that's something for an upcoming podcast, but it feels like those colours are sort of coming back.
Oh, totally. What's the Cassie's Red is an interesting one. Has suddenly, we had one here, 87 Cassie's Red Targa, and that was a colour that people used to hate apparently, and no interest in, but now suddenly the values have really shot up. So yeah, for sure. I mean, that's, if you're thinking about this, you shouldn't, people do think about buying these things as an investment, and it's, you don't want to get in too deep and lose loads of money on something, so it's always good to have in the back of your mind. But definitely worth thinking about colours. If you can find a car that's a rare colour, or if you come across one that is,
but I think
don't just buy it based on the colour.
No, but I think that 924s aren't at that stage yet, where when they are still increasing in value, and regardless of the spec, it will probably be worth more than what you paid for it, unless you overpay significantly.
Or you drill holes in it.
Or drill holes in it. That's
never something I'd recommend. Racing heritage. This is really important, not only because it's cool to have racing heritage with a car. Should we take a short break?
Yeah, I think so.
Just check, because we have too many technical issues, so we're just going to take a short break. Just check everything is on, and we're actually recording this. I'm not just talking to a blank camera, which has happened again.
Two or three times.
That's why we're slightly low on energy.
Forgive us.
The second or third time we've shot this. But we'll get there. So we'll take a short break now and we'll come back. So welcome back after that short break. So yeah, we were just going to start talking about racing heritage, and this for me is an important thing when buying a classic car, because the values when a car has some kind of racing pedigree, there's a couple of reasons why it's interesting. One is racing pedigree always. There is always a greater value in a car that has some kind of racing history, especially if it has real racing history. If the car itself is obviously raced and has what we call in the trade provenance, if it's raced itself. But what's cool also is if you start modifying the car or you want to race the car, especially with the 924, if you look at the amount of like Carrera GT replicas that have been built, we were looking at one recently, weren't we, that was for sale. That's a really cool looking car, Carrera GT. It's a homologation car based on the what I'm just about to talk about, on the racing efforts. But it just opens up your options for modifying, for performance parts. It gives you ideas for how to push the performance of the car based on what was achieved at the factory. Because some of these race cars, they were using I don't know if it's exactly the same block, but it was a 2-litre engine. And they were pushing out over 300 horsepower. And I think it's the GTP, and the GTR was certainly, 375 horsepower.
Wow.
And that was in the 2-litre engine, so obviously probably some pretty strong. I don't imagine that's on original internals, but some turbo wizardry to be pushing out that power, and that's on an endurance car as well. So it wasn't just like a qualifying 375 horsepower. That was 24 hours.
Yeah, and that's impressive for a car that wasn't really developed to be a racing car to begin with. I mean, it was always designed to be an entry-level model, either for Volkswagen or Porsche. Yeah. And then they decided to go racing with it.
And I think, it was a bit of a surprise because the 911, it's one of the, and I was just waffling on for a bit there about racing pedigree, but if you look at the 911, like, that car has the most incredible racing history, and it's a big part of the cult following. And if you look at some of the styling, particularly Magnus Walker, RWB cars, like those are two of the cult, or the most kind of revered, Nakai-san and obviously Magnus Walker, in terms of aftermarket styling on 911s. Both of those are race derived. Magnus Walker's 277 car was takes a lot of, definitely a few cues from the 911R. Nakai-san's RWB cars are obviously heavily based on like the Kramer race cars and like the 903. Mobile phone. We'll take a short break. Sorry, so we were just talking before that mobile interruption, and the lights died shortly afterwards. We will figure this out. About racing history, and we're talking about the 911 particularly, and if you look at the influence racing has both on just the usability of the cars in terms of using them on track, racing yourself, racing classes, but also stylistically in show cars and tuner cars, like what Nakai-san's done, as I was saying, with RWB and Magnus Walker. Those are both heavily race influenced styles. So racing is a big part of a car's appeal in history, particularly for me, but for a lot of people, I think, as well. This is a big thing for Porsche to take the 924 to Le Mans, and actually, according to the facts that I found here, finished 6th in its class, which is pretty impressive. I don't know which class. It'd be interesting to look into that a bit more, what it was running against. 1980 GTP class. That's not too bad at all. Not like for a company, a brand like Porsche, who are usually at the front of the pack, it wasn't a brilliant result by any means, but as this article points out that I've stolen this from, it's not bad for a low budget car that Porsche developed with VW parts. It's a pretty impressive result, and that's Le Mans is regarded as one of the toughest races to put a car into as an endurance test. So there is some cool, interesting racing history with the 924, and I think it's important to talk about, and that's led to some pretty cool models like the 924, the Carrera GT. It is the Carrera GT, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Or
Because there is another
GTS.
Carrera GT. Or is it the GTS?
Yeah, something.
Because,
Someone in the comment section will know.
Yeah, because the Carrera GT is obviously a completely different car.
Yeah. It's got engine. It's got its engine at the wrong end.
Yeah, Carrera GTs are a bit more expensive than
Yeah, a bit.
The Carrera Porsche, whatever it's called, Carrera GTS is 94 Carrera GTS is not a cheap car. That's nearly 100,000.
Yeah.
Probably 80 to 100,000 euros.
Yeah.
Into one of those.
I don't know how many of those were built. It wasn't
I think it's
many.
less than 100.
Yeah, I think so.
Something like 70 or 80.
Yeah, okay.
They're cool cars, really cool cars. Separate podcast. Totally
Yeah,
different
yeah,
cars.
yeah.
We
I think
talked about
Derek
it
Bell's got one, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
given one. Yeah, famously. He must have raced one. That's cool. Values, talking about prices, so go on to values. Launch price. Did you talk about this earlier? I think you mentioned it, but the launch price was
I think so.
5,000.
Or maybe that was in sort of a previous recording.
Could have been a completely different recording.
That didn't work
We're
out.
kind of losing track now.
Yeah, sorry about this. So yeah, really short, about the equivalent of 5,000 euros back in the day here in Sweden. A 911 Targa was about 50% more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like 7,500 euros in the US.
Yeah.
So it's a fair chunk of money. So this really was an entry-level Porsche. More expensive. It was considered quite expensive.
Yeah, it was sort of on par with sort of an Alfa Romeo or Alfetta.
Yeah.
It was a bit more expensive, but not incredibly so.
But yeah, it's as we touched on, especially now with the values, like there are a lot of bang for your buck. So you can get into. So I paid. It's not far off 10 years ago, like 7 or 8 years ago, in England. I think I paid like around 2,500, 2,600 for my 94S.
Mm-hmm.
Now those cars, people are asking closer to 10 to 12,000. I've seen a few in euros, like 15,000 euros for a 94S. So those have really crept up. But the base, I keep calling it the base, but like the original 94 2-litre, you were saying earlier, you've known of people getting into them for like 500 euros still, which is pretty
but
incredible.
those are obviously project cars.
Shit heaps.
Refer
to them as. But that's, as I touched on before, like that, if you can get into one for cheap, that's mechanically sound.
Reasonably, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 euros will get you into a good one.
And you've got a car that if you, all the usual things like fuel lines, ignition, just replacing a lot of the key parts, as long as the main block and head are okay, but like things like fuel pumps and fuel lines, brake lines, get all those sorted. Take a few spares with you, pack up, you could drive, people have done some insane trips in these cars, and I think that's always, I've seen articles where people have driven TVRs across Africa, and like you can take any car, if you're willing to put the work in, the span of time in, you can take, within reason, any car anyway, but these 924s have done some really intrepid trips, and I think that's really cool, that you can buy, there's something really cool about that you could buy a car for 2,000 to 3,000 euros, that's a classic, it's a Porsche. You can turn into a track car, you can do intrepid trips. People have built Safari 94s, it's a whole other thing that I remember I was considering that at one stage and boring Felix or annoying him with pictures of 94 Safari.
I thought you were calling me boring Felix, which not entirely off.
But yeah, like that whole Safari thing has been really interesting, and the 94 is not immune to it. So yeah, if you fancy doing a bit of off-road and like kind of rally, there's been that's I didn't even talk about that in the race heritage, but a 94 turbo ran at Monte Carlo. Actually, was it a turbo or was it a 94 that had been turbocharged? There's a really interesting bit of history with a 94 that ran at Monte Carlo very successfully, I believe, as well. So yeah, and I think the factory, there's some story in that we need to research. I think it was drivers or some of the engineers there that initiated this Monte Carlo project. They saw the strength in the car as a potential rally car, but probably because of the weight distribution, the superiority of like a 50-50, balanced lightweight car. So yeah, it's got some really amazing history as it's not just, it wasn't just a budget car. It raced, it rallied, it's done crazy touring. I think even Porsche themselves did some rallying in Australia. Is it like the Tasmanian Rally or something? Okay. Some really interesting race history. If you dig into it, there's some cool stuff back there. So values are certainly on the increase. The getting into the 2 litre is becoming increasingly.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long ago where sort of €1,000 would get you into a running and driving one, but I think that those days are for the most part gone.
Yeah.
So yeah, realistically, 2,000 to 3,000 euros.
Yeah.
Perhaps even a bit less in some markets.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. And as I said, 94S's now I've seen people, even for a really solid, I've seen people asking 10 to 12,000 for a 94 if it's been recently restored or resprayed. So, I would jump in if you were thinking about getting one. Like now is the time. They are going to. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that they are increasing in value. And rightly so, because they're a good car. And
it's on the subject of value. It's interesting to see the 924. It's the fact that it's not really a Porsche and not really a Volkswagen has sort of helped to keep the values down.
Yeah.
Because if you look at things like a Mark 1 Golf GTI, those are horrifically more expensive than a 924, but with the GTI is probably a bit quicker to 60, but
that's actually really interesting. I mean, the whole 911 thing is a different thing than the Porsche. But then if you look at that's an interesting, because that's what everyone compares it to.
Yeah.
Not many people compare it to something like a Mark 1 GTI, which has really shot up in value, and the 94 has been left behind. But people would argue this, but I would argue the 94 is a much better car than the Mark 1 Golf GTI. The Mark 1 Golf GTI is a brilliant car, but it's not a rear-wheel drive, 50-50 weight distribution.
But I suppose it's an iconic
Porsche
car in its own right, and
the
924 has never been that. But like we discussed earlier, that it was really a leap on for Porsche in terms of development and technology, or sort of making a normal car. So it's I don't think that values will be this low for much longer. An
interesting point, you just made a note in here, we were joking about this earlier, about 911 prices being fueled by hipster scum. You bought yours before, it was cool.
I did.
Which is a cool thing in itself, actually, that you were pretty early on that. I did not, and I paid the price, literally, for being a hipster and buying one now. I think
hipsters are moving off 911s now.
I hope so, yeah. No, not too much, though, because I don't want the price to go down. But, it's pretty fucking annoying. But the 94, you mentioned earlier about it having a bit of a cold following. I think if you look on Instagram, I have definitely noticed, and we touched on I don't know if we did touch on this actually, I've noticed, this was in a previous recording, long day, we talked about I've definitely noticed, I've seen quite a few 911 owners dabbling in or buying a little 924 as a second car, which I think is the coolest thing. It's like,
been there, done that.
Yeah, exactly. You've done it yourself, so you've obviously seen the appeal, and it's just something a bit different. I think that it's cool to see 911 owners give it the respect it deserves by actually.
Yeah, and I think that's a sign of the times ahead. The 94 is finally being recognised as an important part of Porsche's
regardless
history.
of what badge it has as well. But it's being seen as a car that.
Because traditionally, I'd say that 911 owners have always looked into getting into sort of a Beetle to have as a second car, but now that seems to be moving more towards 924s.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure. But also with that, going back to the hipster scum that we mentioned earlier, but you are noticing... If
you are hipster scum, no offence.
You're welcome to listen to the podcast. We invite all hipsters. But yeah, the hipsterization of anything, whether it's beer or photography or analog camera, whatever it is, it increases the value and the coolness and the following around a product or a band or whatever it is. And if you look at the 924s, I'm noticing a cooler crowd, 911 owners, but also, like younger people getting into them because it is an entry-level 911, and people doing cool, like really nice original cars, people photographing them nicely. If you go on Instagram, you'll find a lot of really nice-looking 924s, photographed nicely, really looked after. And that, again, there's so many. If you go on the 924 hashtag, I've noticed that on Instagram, there's a ton of stuff. There's so much stuff being posted, and it's good quality, like people posting good photos and people with good followings. And that, for me, is definitely an indication that these cars, you were talking about, like that cold following that they're getting, and seeing more 911 owners dabbling in them because they're just, they're cheap, great little cars for little money. So yeah, values are definitely on the up, and I don't see that changing. The next thing we were going to talk about, should we take a short break and then we'll do our last two sections, we'll hammer through them. So yeah, we'll be back after a short break. Cool, welcome back after the short break. So in the next section, but we might do these back to back, we're feeling ambitious. We're going to do buying a 94, brave, 94, and then also the final question, would we buy a 94, which you've already answered.
Yeah, we've answered that multiple times.
Yeah, but we'll do a little bit on that. I think that'd be interesting. So yeah, if you were to buy a 94, Felix, as a man who has recently bought a 94, what were the things you were looking for and what was important?
Yeah, and this will probably go into the spec, the question about spec that we were talking about earlier. I'd quite like. Since I'm into the early cars, the 1976 through 78. I'd like. I mean, basically, as with any classic car, rust is the enemy, and these cars do rust as well. Obviously.
Yeah, if you think an engine rebuild is expensive, you should look at the build.
An engine rebuild on a 924 is really cheap.
Yeah.
And rust repair on any car is expensive, and especially paintwork. So that's the number one priority.
It's worth mentioning. So the early cars were partly galvanized, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
Main body was galvanized, but not the panels. Is that correct? Wings, or was it just the under?
I'm not really sure.
Partly galvanized. Early cars were partly galvanized, and then later cars.
Yeah, they were fully galvanized.
Whatever fully galvanized means.
Yeah, but
anything metal.
And but I mean they were fully galvanized 30 odd years ago now.
Yeah,
so
completely. Yeah, that's a really good point, because everyone always talks about this. And you hear the same with Defenders, don't you, and galvanized chassis. But
and Audi 100s were also fully galvanized, and when's the last time you saw one of those rust-free in traffic? Yeah. So
it's a very good point. So rust is absolutely critical. Yeah. Finding a solid shell is your first. It's much easier to bolt on the other bits and fix. Engines and if you have any gearbox issues, transmission issues, than trying to fix holes or any structural rust problems that you have in a car.
So mechanicals, not really that much to be worried about, because like we were discussing earlier, that the number of parts cars available outnumber the amount of driving cars by.
That's a really good point. That's the production numbers. Going back to earlier a bit on the history, but I think they produced 170,000.
Yeah, something along those lines, which is, I mean,
and that's just 924.
Yeah, exactly, because the 944
and
came after
the Volkswagen.
Yeah,
and the Audis.
And the. So parts isn't a problem, and most of the mechanicals are actually, it's sort of, a lot of things can still be bought new off the shelf. So when I did mine up, I bought most of the parts off Autodoc in Germany. Well, I think they shipped from Poland or somewhere, but there were a number of different parts, a number of different manufacturers of parts, and a whole different range of the price range as well. So So what I would look for is that the original that was 924 specific parts were there, and that includes some of the switchgear, and perhaps most importantly the instruments. The early cars had a tacho that went to 8,000, which was slightly optimistic, considering it sort of runs out of breath after 5 and a bit, but it looks cool. So yeah, and also the early cars had the metal emblems on the rear, which are also no longer available from Porsche, and it can be hard to source. Also, the external fuel filler cap is sort of I think it's the same one that was used on the US spec Mark 1 Golf GTIs, but not the Euro spec, because that has a bayonet fitting, and the fuel filler cap has a screw fitting on the 924. This is properly nerdy stuff. And yeah, I think that's it. The steering wheel is a nice, also an early, the two-spoke steering wheel that was fitted to the early cars is the same as the Mark 1 Golf and Jetta, albeit with a different horn pad. So yeah, so those are and one important thing, that if you are looking at an early one that quote unquote only needs a fuel pump relay, just remember that those are no longer available, and they are proprietary to the 924, 76 through 78, I think. Later cars had shared the relay with some Audi and Volkswagen models, but the early ones are wired differently. So yeah.
Interesting considerations. But yeah, I mean, you can always, when buying these cars, just a general bit of advice, but if it's a new model to you, there's such a good community around.
Oh yeah.
Pretty much any car you can always find, as you guys know, if you're listening to this, you will already know. There's always forums and owners clubs. So, but the Porsche community, the 94 community, is really good. There's so many good resources, and there just seems to be. I think there's something about the 94 buyer of being the car being a bit of an under. Like the kind of people who buy these cars generally seem to be quite good, decent people, because they're quite interesting. They've picked a car that's not because of its badge. Well, some of them potentially have, but this car has been a bit frowned upon. It is a bit of an underdog, and I don't know. They're just a really great feeling.
Yeah, they tend to be, well, at least they have been. They tend to be bought by proper enthusiasts. Who really know their stuff.
Totally.
And,
so yeah, you will absolutely find help, and they seem to be very welcoming to get more owners into that community, which I can't say the same for some other marques aren't quite as helpful as welcoming. So yeah, you can always find an expert, or as always get a PPI. Probably not from Porsche, because that will cost you a ton of money.
And they won't know what to look for.
Of the car. But, final section. Would we buy one? Well, yes.
We have.
I've bought 3 of them, and you have bought one as well. So yeah.
Up until this point.
Yeah, I would buy another, and I'm in the process of hopefully buying a car right now, and if that didn't come off, my backup plan was to buy a 924 turbo, and we've been talking about this, but I would 100% buy another one of these. As we touched on at the beginning, brilliant GT car, lightweight, very balanced chassis, near 50-50 weight distribution, mechanically robust. Increasingly appreciated design and silhouette. I think they're just going to get better and better looking over age. I've really started to appreciate that outline. And
a brilliant car to work on and to learn about sort of fixing your own car, because it's, like you said, help is readily available online. Parts are easy to source, parts are cheap, and they're easy to work on. So it's
and pretty reliable. There's not a lot that I've read, that you can have issues with the CIS, the injection system, but it won't leave you stranded, which is cool. That's what I'm always looking for, things that will critical areas of failure that will leave you stranded if they go wrong. And
I think maybe we should do an entirely separate podcast on the Cageatronic injection system, because that's so.
I'll let you do that.
that's so much maligned, but I mean that was used on almost any European fuel-injected car from the 70s up until almost the 90s.
Yeah, is that a Bosch?
Yeah, it's a Bosch system, and it's. I mean, when I got my 94, it wasn't running properly, and all it needed was a proper clean. So the warm-up regulator, which is a component in was clogged. So I just took that apart, cleaned it, put it back, and it worked. So it's a fully mechanical system, but it is sensitive to vacuum leaks, and it's.
One thing you can do, which I've seen, people have converted to carbs. So if you wanted a more simple system, potentially it's usable, but.
Okay, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, setting up carbs. Yeah. I think that's more.
If you know a good carb tuner, you want to do it yourself. The mechanical simplicity of a carb has its benefits, but also people have run motorbike carbs to some success, varying levels of success.
Yeah, will probably produce a bit more power.
Yeah, I mean, you can. I've seen these 150. Yeah, it is possible to get 150 horsepower.
And you get a really addictive induction noise as well.
Yeah. So it's possible. There are tuning options. What would be your last question or last topic? What would be your dream spec if you if you had money, no object?
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, this is what we fall asleep at night dreaming about, isn't it? Our money, no object, 94. Not supercars or any of the hypercar products. What would be your dream spec?
I think. Probably a rally yellow or Reseda green with sort of tan interior, perhaps something really 70s, really leery, and has to be an early one with the dainty little wing mirrors. Those can be hard to source as well.
I remember you saying that. That's pretty simple. So I'd be torn between two, going for a very early car, spoilerless car, because I think, as I said earlier, with the chrome trim, I just think that's such a lovely, simple silhouette that's going to be increasingly appreciated. But probably, I think it's Monaco blue is an interesting colour, and there's another bright blue that I can't remember what it's called.
The Monaco blue, is that the sort of the light, almost baby blue?
Yeah. That's quite an interesting colour. But something in an interesting colour and an early car would probably be one choice. My second choice would be, as we talked about, a two-tone turbo. There's a green, I think it is Reseda green with a darker green, almost like a racing green, two-tone. If you Google 924 turbo, that's a nice option. But the thing that really I love on the 924 turbos is the plaid, the tartan interior. I just think that's the coolest place to sit. You've got the door cards, the seats, the rear seats. I feel like if I had one of those every time I get into that car, it would just make me happy. Yeah. A happy place to sit in.
Because the normal 924s, I think they all came with a black rear seats. Yeah. Sort of vinyl or something. Yeah. So I think it was only the turbos that had the colour matched full interior.
And it's really special. If you like, I mean, if you look at, again, we were talking about Magnus Walker earlier and what he's done in the 911s, but that's almost a signature thing with the outlaw look, is to do these tartan seats. If you buy a 924 turbo, it comes with them as standard. So that's, for me, is a really cool thing. So amazing 80s looking interior with two-tone. You've got the extra power with the 177 horsepower. Arguably better braking, but also a really cool interior to sit in. So I would for sure buy another. I think they're great little cars. So hopefully, if you made it to the end of this, you found out a little bit more about 924s, and some of our enthusiasm for them has worn off, and maybe we'll buy one. Because I genuinely, I would buy another if I wasn't going through big expensive prices.
I hope our enthusiasm comes through, despite us being quite knackered after doing this for But I genuinely, I would buy another, and I think they're great little cars, and I don't think you can go wrong with one, really. No.
Don't quote me on that. Thanks, and tune into I think we've got a list of cars to get through.
Yeah.
So,
like, share, subscribe.
Yeah, exactly. But next we need to discuss it. But we've got the Miata on the list, MGB, or MX-5 as you call it in England. Yeah, there's a whole list of interesting cars.
I put Lada Niva on there.
Is that the 4x4? Yeah, I would have that. I second that actually. Yeah, Lada Niva. There's going to be so many cool cars, and the plan is, as I said before, is to do one per episode.
Yeah.
Not jump around on topical classic car news or different cars. Like just nerd out on one particular car.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully it's interesting. Yeah, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
Look forward to the or look out for the next issue. I don't know if you'll look forward to it, but maybe just look out for it anyway. Cool.
Okay. Yeah. See you soon.